The Great Religious Awakening was a major religious revival that took place in Europe and America during the 1730s. The Great Awakening can be divided into three categories: before, during, and after. This social documentary will cover all three of these topics. The first thing to cover is what happened before the Awakening, and the causes behind it. Many things and factors caused the Great Awakening, and these factors have additional factors for why they occurred. One of the main causes of the Awakening was the fact that people were becoming too detached from religion, ironically. As a result, many preachers became disappointed in their actions, and increased the finesse on their sermons. This caused people to flock to these preachers and become invested. One notable preacher was George Whitefield. He was an Anglican priest who preached to mass crowds in open fields because no church building would hold him. Another reason is the neglect in the southern colonies. While self-explanatory, the southern colonies were not supported by England or anyone during this time period. People became anxious in the colonies and resorted to religious help. During the Awakening is where things actually get interesting. During the Awakening, people became more passionately and emotionally invested in their religion. The short answer as to how their behavior changed is that their behavior more accurately described the ideal biblical behavior to crops and other people. The longer description actually makes them more tolerable. Because the faith involved people being taught to be literate, all people have now learned to read and write. Even slaves are taught to read so that they can understand the Bible. Now, since black people are able to be literate, they now take up a substantial part of congregations. Eventually, the first black churches were founded in the southern colonies. The Awakening also positively impacted women as well. Religious importance swayed women and caused them to take on higher roles in congregations. They are also encouraged to talk about their feelings about religion and such in various forms of literature. Finally, the aftermath of the Awakening is what sets it apart from most other major events. The Religious Awakening set apart many events from each other, as the Awakening influenced many more things than just religion. The Awakening also influenced the survival of the colonies and people in them. The Awakening melded the colonies to have one common goal. At some times, the goal was to defy Catholic domination, while at others it was the fear of political power. It also did other things, like unify the colonies to have a universal religion. This should be self-explanatory, but it was due to a single religion sweeping across the nation. Other impacts left by the Awakening involved the church having a relationship between each member. Each member promised to be obedient to the church, and the church promised to give each member the duty to be faithful. There were many people involved in the Awakening. The first man worth being discussed is George Whitefield, who almost single-handedly initiated the Awakening. He incited discussion amongst members of his community, traveling across the countryside in 1739. Many people criticized his ways of being very emotional about his sermons, while others praised it and copied his style. Eventually, numerous iterations of his style caused the Awakening to spread along the countryside. The overall message of the Awakening, additionally, was sparked by him. He preached ideas of equality, and that sin would make you go to hell, and being sinless would put you in heaven. This simple idea was spread around the country naturally, and was the base message for the Awakening. Another very important leader was a man named Jonathan Edwards. Edwards did not directly initiate the revolution, but inspired George Whitefield to spread the Puritan message. His style was very similar to Whitefield's, in which he was very emotional and passionate about his sermons, but less dramatic. Each sermon he provided was met with a slow speed, but drew incredible images about the visions of hell and the glory of heaven. His most famous sermon, Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God, described with incredible emotion about how God was merciless and viewed the people's lives as pointless. The sermon also vividly described the horrors of what hell meant, and what God's wrath would be if life was sinful. Some examples included an arrow strung at a heart, a dam with rushing waters, a person hanging by a thread with thunder at the sides, threatening the thread that held their life up. These vivid images scared the people and brought upon more direct causes of the Awakening. The final leader of the revolution is a minister named Samuel Davies. Samuel was a president of Princeton University, who was known to preach to African slaves. He believed that sermons must be delivered with intensity and importance. His contribution to the awakening was mainly towards the African population, and was credited for the first mass conversion of slaves in Virginia to Catholicism. He believed that black slaves were deserving of the same treatment that white people had. One of the more famous pieces of work involves a letter where he quotes a slave he encountered along his journey. He is also credited for his intense sermons about religion, and how they should break away from the Church of England. The people of the Awakening and the events within it in general would go on to shape the future of America and the colonies. The spread of religion was a major factor in the unification of America against British control. Religion in the Great Awakening brought the people together in a common goal for the first time in American history.